Jennifer. And now I am going to turn it over to Marie Doerner. She's the Learning Disabilities Specialist at San Diego Community College District Continuing Education, which is adult education, non-credit classes, basic skills classes. And she is very knowledgeable in this field. She has worked with CalPRO on a number of projects developing our online courses on learning disabilities and also teaching them. So we're happy to have her doing this webinar today. And I will turn it right over to you, Marie.
Okay. So the title of this workshop is Classroom Strategies That Work for Students with Learning Disabilities. We're only an hour, so this sort of scratches the surface. But okay, so I'll go to the second slide. So the agenda today was for me to do an introduction and to find out a little bit about who you were, talk about students with disabilities and who they are, what are some effective instruction that works with students with learning disabilities, what strategies work. Also next time, because we are scheduling another workshop next month, and then any of the references that I used in putting the PowerPoint together, I put them at the end for you. So starting with me, I'm from Australia. I graduated from college with a physics degree, and then I came to the United States and worked as a teacher and ended up in LA and was looking for somewhere to work and started working with Landmark School in Encino, California, with kids with learning disabilities, and I just fell in love with that population. When we moved to San Diego in 1994 after the Northridge earthquake, I started working at San Diego Continuing Education really as a part-time job while I went to school and got my teaching credential, and I never really left. Right now in my job today, I help students achieve their goals in the non-credit classes that they're in. I do teach a basic education class. All of this is with adults, and I work with adults in our ABE and high school programs. I work with their teachers, and I work with them hoping that they can be successful in their classrooms. Also, because we're our adult school is part of the part of the San Diego Community College District. We also do the learning disability assessment. So I do the learning disability assessment as well. So when you came in today, we started by asking, who are you, so that I have a little bit of an idea of who you are, and it's 78.57% of you are teachers. We have 4 administrators and 2 counselors. So, and then the other thing is you can ask questions at any time, and I'll try and talk and read at the same time to try and answer your questions. But I will keep talking. So to start with, when you start thinking about students with disabilities, who are they? And at the community college especially, we really want to make sure that everyone knows that to reveal that you have a disability of any sort of disability is voluntary, and it's very sensitive for people sometimes. Some students will just burst out, oh, I have a learning disability, I can't do this work, or I have a learning disability, I've always struggled in school. And then other people, it takes a long, long time before they will confess up or ask for help. They want to really be like everyone else and just do their best and try harder. People with disabilities are also entitled to confidentiality, so if students want to talk about their disability, I'll often take them outside of the classroom to talk to them. And with all of this disabilities is that bad behavior in the classroom or not matching behavioral expectations is nothing to do with disability, and all of our students are expected to follow the same behavioral rules as everybody else. It's very interesting, the disability categories. I don't want to talk too much about all of the disabilities, but a lot of people come in and say, oh, I have a student with a learning disability, but we actually serve a lot of different people with a lot of different disabilities. The community colleges in California are under Title V, which is for community colleges, and we have specific disabilities that we serve. So students need to have verification for these disabilities in our program. But it's something to think about in the classroom. Besides the learning disabilities, and the law is changing. The Title V is the law for California, and they had changed the law October 2015, and these changes will kick into place in the community colleges in July 1st, I think. And we've changed the names of some of the categories and tried to put, and then there's a few new categories, which is kind of interesting. Physical disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing, blind, low vision. We have our people with learning disabilities, a lot of people with acquired brain injuries are very similar in some ways to people with learning disabilities. There's also other health conditions and disabilities. I have in my class one of my students with cerebral palsy, who again has similar, some of the issues are similar to people with learning disabilities, and other parts of his disability are different. The strategies really work with everybody, but the new categories for the community colleges would be attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. In the past, we had developmental disabilities, and the new name for this is intellectual disabilities, which is bringing us in line with the rest of the world. Autism spectrum, and there's a lot of material in the news about the flood of newly diagnosed people with autism and how many different people we have. And then the last one is mental health disabilities. We had mental health disabilities before, but I think it was called psychological disabilities. So these are our new Title V categories, which will start in the fall. But I thought it was a good thing to talk about as we talk about learning disabilities and how to work with people with disabilities in the classroom in general. So that we can think about beyond just learning disabilities. Students with learning disabilities specifically are defined as having average to above average intelligence. People with learning disabilities are smart and really capable of learning. And this has changed also for us as well, because this and or on the next two categories, the statistically significant processing, which means the different parts of their brain work at different levels. And so some of the tasks they can do the same as everybody else. and other areas they really are weak. So you might have someone who verbally can talk to you and it sounds like they're just a normal everyday person, but then when you get them to write or you get them to organize or do math, it's like you've got a new person because they have a weakness in the writing or the math. Or it could go the other way. When you talk to someone, they don't really know, they don't seem like they know what's going on, but then you give them a math problem and they can do it really well. So if the different parts of the brain are working at different levels, that would be a significant processing disorder. The next one is they're very smart, but their schoolwork level just does not match with their intelligence level. And in the past, we expected a student with learning disability to be able to be both of those things, have the processing deficit and the achievement gap, but becoming in line with other organizations and other federal programs, it's going to be, in the future, it'll be either or, which is really good for adults, especially hardworking adults, because a lot of times I have really overachievers who really work hard, and they can get their achievement up to pretty fair levels, but then there's not the gap between their intelligence and the achievement. The other thing that to have a learning disability is we have to show you, it's on the same slide. I'm on the last part. Problems are due to, problems are not due to other disabilities or educational deprivation. They have to have at least been in school. So there, I'll change it. So now we get to the meat of the talk. The first thing is to teach important skills. In most of our programs, we have very limited time for instruction, so we have to make sure every minute counts. That means that we have to be, as a teacher, we have to be really efficient with our use of time and make sure that transitions are really smooth, that we don't have much downtime at all in the classroom. And students really are there, and I know we have students who come in late, and students with learning disabilities often have problems with time, especially students with attention deficit disorder have a hard time with time in general. So, but just like Marion started this talk right at 1 o'clock, and we will finish right at 2 o'clock, I think it's really important that as soon as you're supposed to start teaching and make sure every minute counts. The second thing is that adults with learning disabilities should be involved in deciding what's important. And if you can build into your classroom time, helping them decide maybe at the beginning of the lesson or at the end of the lesson, so far or in the middle, what have we done that's really important? What is it that you have to really remember? Because sometimes people with learning disabilities have trouble deciding on what is the main idea here and what are the details, and that makes note-taking really hard. And the more that we can teach them how to take notes and how to separate what's important with not important, that's really powerful. Many students with learning disabilities have become passive learners, and it's really important to help students engage and be active learners. As a child, I was always in trouble for talking, and I'd have to stand in the corner, or other punishments my teachers figured out for me. And the result of that was then to become a quiet person and not be active in the classroom. And a lot of times, in order to be quiet, then it's hard to stay focused. So we really have to teach students to really be active participants in the classroom. You can't sit at the back. You need to be really out the front, really focused. And for students with learning disabilities, sitting right at the front is often really a powerful way to stay focused. I get really excited in the classroom when a student that has been historically sitting at the back, sitting at the back, sitting at the back, and you come in one day, oh, you're in the front, finally you got it. And focus on the functional skills. So I have a question. What would you suggest? Would you suggest learning to write all lessons in UDL format to ensure students are able to engage and access content? Universal design is an amazing concept, and I would I'm not going to talk about universal design exactly here, although I think everything that I'm going to talk about is part of universal design. So those people, universal design says that if you design a lesson, you should design a lesson for everybody. It started with architecture sort of, and like doorknobs. So with the old round doorknobs, when you're physically fit and healthy, you can use a doorknob easily. But as we get older and we have arthritic hands, it's much harder to turn the handle. For a student with no hands, it's impossible for them to turn the handle. So the new lever type door handles, you can just use your elbow. You could easily open it another way. So universal design is really a way of looking at your lesson, so that if you design your lesson, can everybody in the classroom learn from that method? And I really think it's a powerful method. When I first worked at Landmark, one of our mantras really was cut the fluff and teach the stuff. Really look at what are we teaching and what parts are really extra information that maybe super high functioning students can do for extra credit or extra information. And what parts of your lessons do you really want every single person to know? So here comes a question for you that I'm going to ask you is, if we're talking about teaching less but teaching it better, how would you know what to cut out? Also, students need explicit, intensive instruction and numerous practice opportunities, and it is more efficient to teach fewer but important skills and teach them to mastery. But what are some of the things that you could cut? So there's a general chat box just open. So it says, in correctional education in the jails, we have very large multi-level classes. Designing the lesson with differentiation seems to be the key. And then Maria has shared a website about UDL with the universal design. Anyone else have have ideas of how could you teach less better, and how do you know what to cut out. One of the things is you can figure out what do students already know, and then maybe you don't need to go over that part of the lesson as extensively, and then just teach the new material. Like Leanne, less talking and explaining and more practice. For some students, that's a key, especially for students who have a hard time listening. They need to be shown over and over again. We're going to get to the ask student their specific goals and try to match subject matter. Oh, and I really like Karen's idea. It says cut out asking one student to answer to the whole class. Instead, have students discuss with a group or a partner. One of the things that happens a lot in classes is the students who have a lot of confidence, who know a lot, want to answer all the questions. I know I was one of those kids myself, and I hated it when the teacher wouldn't call on me. But if you're asking the same people questions all the time, it's really easy to hunker down and be that passive student who doesn't get embarrassed by answering incorrectly. So share, pair, think, pair, share, working in a group, doing a jigsaw sort of exercise would be really good. We have project-based learning, visuals and practice, really good ideas. And then Natasha's talking about grouping students. You can either group them at skill levels. So in my class, I have low, medium, and high-level math students. I don't call them that, but or you could have groups that have different levels within the same classroom. Michael says to use the Socratic method to get all my students answering, so that shy people or people with learning disabilities can be participants. So I think these are really good ideas. The bottom picture on this slide, I was really trying to get that idea of spending lots of times on guided practice. A lot of classrooms do a lot of practice, but the students practicing on their own, and I think a lot of times for the teacher to just go over a few more examples really helps people with learning disabilities. Well, for some of my students, they just need the whole worksheet. They need to go over it with me over and over again, so that helps. The slide I picked really was for think alouds and modeling, because the more you can model the behaviors, the thinking skills that you want the students to have, the better. And the whole think aloud technique is for you not just to do the problem for the student, but tell them what are you thinking about and what's the next step, and how do you know that's the next step, so that you're really teaching them how you think so that they can think. A lot of people with learning disabilities really have inefficient methods of thinking. They haven't really figured out what's the quickest way for me to think about this. So if you can model for them the thinking process, then that will really help their learning along down the road. The next slide, it talks about teaching explicitly. Make sure you say what you mean and mean what you say. My slideshow just flipped out.
Sorry, that's me trying to take you back to the bigger slides.
Oh, that's okay. I really like constructivist sort of methodology where you have discovery in the classroom. The only downside of it is you don't exactly know what students are going to learn from it. So it needs to, so if you want a student to learn something specific, you have to specifically teach that. The other thing is for students specifically is for helping them with their motivation and help them with believing in themselves, is to teach contextually. The more authentic the learning, the more the student understands that this is something that's really important to me. They need to know why they're learning a task and why it is important. I did a tour of High Tech High, which is a set of charter schools in San Diego here. And we had a student ambassador walking around and said, why are these schools so good? Why do you like this school? And she said, you know, until I came to High Tech High, I didn't know why I was learning. I was just doing my work, and I didn't know why I was learning. And that's the most important thing that's changed me as a student. And so I think the more you can help students know why are you learning and why is this important, rather than just, here, we have to do fractions today. Relevance is really important for keeping students motivated. Good, I've got more questions now. The way the brain works, I picked this slide system. It kind of has the electrical wires on the sides of the slide, and I picked it because all learning, to learn anything new and keep it forever, really into your long-term memory, you really need to grow new brain. You have to grow new dendrites on your neurons, and you are changing your brain by learning. I especially tell students, you know, by the end of 3 hours in my class, your head should hurt. You want to know that you're really telling your brain, okay, you have to grow new pieces so that you can really lay down new memories. To do that, we really want to lay the new memories onto old memories, so that if we have an old memory that's got strong pathways within our brain, then you want the new ones to be hooked onto that. So check the old, and then before teaching the new, really get students to know what students' background information is so that they can tie the new onto that. And then we had practice, 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 and the only problem with practicing is how many times do students come back with their homework with every problem wrong. And what they've done then is practice incorrectly. So I think it's really important that we catch student mistakes early before it becomes a memory for them. So I have 3 questions for you. One is, how do you catch people early enough so that they do practice perfectly? I think someone already mentioned, how do we require frequent responses? When I was in teacher school, we actually timed ourselves teaching, and we had to count how many student responses we got back. It's kind of the opposite for what I'm doing now, which is just talking, and every now and again you do some typing. But it is a really important part of checking in with students, is requiring frequent responses. And what are some examples of how you could get frequent responses? And then the other thing that we have to do is, as we lay the new memories, is spiral back to the old memories as well. So you might want to have on all of your tests some questions from earlier units so that students know, okay, we need to not only learn this new material, but it doesn't mean you're allowed to forget any of the old material. And especially I find in math that students spend forever learning how to do fractions, then you go on to decimals and they just forget all their fraction work. But students need to know this to keep going. So I have some questions here. Okay, the first question just flipped over. Is there a disability related to associations? I was once told that some individuals have a hard time making associations. I think people have a hard time making associations themselves. Part of it is practice, but I think people, they're part of learning disabilities or mental health disabilities could include having those issues. It's one of the things that we also test as part of the learning disability testing. So Robert wrote, frequent check for understanding. So in these webinars, our goal was every 10 minutes, make sure that we ask questions, see if you're still there. Are we on track with what you were wanting to hear? Ask direct questions from students. Also, you can also do choral responses. One way we could really up our numbers when we were recording was ask the whole class to answer in chorus. And I know that really lends itself to do times tables. A lot of ESL classes, I think, do a lot of choral responses. And then you've got everyone answering. And it's easier if a student is a bit shy, they can be listening. And if someone doesn't know the answer, then they're getting the whole class is telling them the answer. Sharon says that they review the content covered before the students leave for the day and then review it the next meeting. That's really important. I have warm-up of the previous day's concepts. That's good. Answer keys on the website, and then they will need to do the same concept again in class the next day. At the end of the lesson, I asked the student what they liked or disliked about the lesson. I asked them to tell me something that stood out and they learned. And I've done that too. I've stood at the doorway and shake their hands as they leave, and they have to say, what did you learn today? This is part of the class, and you need to be learning. We have another website listed here. It's a great course on learning to learn for students, free online self-paced online strategies and how the brain works. Barbara Oakley out of San Diego State. And my last slide today, it talks about that as well, learning how to learn. And what is the brain research? What's the brain research out there showing? The next slide says corrective feedback as soon as possible. So one way is, and I know teachers are walking around the classroom, corrective feedback as soon as possible, or checking with each other. Again, you can do the share, pair share thing. See if students can check with each other if they're doing it the right way. Promoting generalization is really a difficult thing, and that's if you learn to do fractions in the classroom, can you still do fractions at home? I take Tai Chi in the morning, and our teacher, we learn our form facing the front, and then after a few sessions, he goes around to the back to see if we face the opposite direction, can we still do the form? And it's amazing how many people cannot do the form because they're facing in a different direction. So giving the students the information in multiple ways so that they can see the different phases of this. Be prepared, be organized, model efficiency. However you want the students to be, you need to be as the teacher. This is the last slide of the effective instruction. Students with disability are entitled to accommodations if they have a verifiable disability and they give information to the counselors in your program, then they are eligible. Their legal right is to have accommodations. The accommodations need to be reasonable and are required by law. They can't fundamentally change the course. But on the upside, students need to become independent learners, and many accommodations require upfront learning. So we have to really balance those things out. And you can work with your counselors, or the students can work on that to get their accommodations. And we have an accommodations form that talks about the different kinds of accommodations. The other thing that I didn't talk about in this webinar was technology. There's a lot of accommodations. There are computer programs that will read text for students, that they can talk and the computer will write for them. There are pens that will help them take notes in class. It records and times everything. So there's a lot of different technological, but that's a whole nother workshop. It would take more than an hour just to talk about those sorts of things. And it's frustrating trying to get accommodations for students, also to get students accommodations on the GED and HiSET and the task. The new Americans with Disabilities Act is trying to make that better, but I think we still need to keep pushing forward with that. And I agree with students don't like to feel different, and they don't want to be different from the rest of the class. A lot of times I try and talk to students about what's best for them and the difference between equity and equality, and what do you need to do well. Oh, we're doing just perfectly in time-wise, I think. So there's some good discussions going on. I'm not able to answer all of the questions right now, but I really encourage you to keep talking. I didn't talk about all the other components of effective instruction. What kind of strategies do you use? And you can keep typing those in.
Actually, Denise, I'm going to switch us over to the chat for this slide, which is about your components and strategies of effective instruction. Sorry, Denise. You have to start over.
I think the other thing that I haven't really talked about is just classroom discipline and helping students sit still for long periods of time, or which students need to sit still and which students need to be able to prowl around the outskirts of the classroom so that they're not disturbing other students, but that if they need to be moving while they're learning. I think one of the most important things for students is really learn how to learn. And someone said that earlier, that learning how to learn and learning how individuals learn. For me, I can study well early in the morning, whereas a lot of people are like, no, don't make me do school in the morning. I can't do it. I'm a night owl. I do my study then. So it's And Nancy's here, and I always love Nancy's story. She needs to be ironing if she's doing something really difficult. So different people learn in different ways. So the more students, especially as adults, they can start figuring these things out. Let me read a couple of your points here. Building community in the classroom definitely helps with effective instruction. My students love coming to the whiteboard and doing math problems. And Janet Zadina, she's on a later slide. In the middle of her talk, she also has a TED Talk that's really interesting. She makes everyone in the auditorium stand up and sit down. And what that does is really make your blood start flowing. A lot of times we are sitting in the classroom for so long that the blood is really not getting up into our brains, and so our brains are not working as well as possible. So getting students up to the whiteboard, doing math problems, and then coming back and sitting down, getting up and moving down, I think that's a really good strategy. The use of manipulatives and pen colors for different steps in problems. One of our teachers uses different colored paper for different parts of her lessons. So all of her summaries will be in one color. The worksheets are in a different color. The facts are in a different color. Procedures would be in a different color, so they can be completely color organized and start to learn that way. Some really good ideas here. Students with dyslexia, I ask them to cover the text and not reading and uncover sentence by sentence. Colored paper and highlighter to help my class. The question was, what is the process by which students were diagnosed with dyslexia? So some students come from the K-12 system with IEPs that say they have a learning disability. Some come in with verification from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And then because we're part of the community college district here in San Diego, we also can do the learning disability assessment for them. Let me a higher level student will interview a student of lesser ability. They'll report the answers together to the class. I have a classroom set up for students with 4 at a table, so students have examples of who can help with others and get assistance from instructors. I have a smart board that I use with students most daily so they can use their independent papers, but come up to the smart board and stand up to be part of the answer. You have to take consideration learning styles of your students, make sure you're really multisensory, visual, auditory, tactile. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And some of these you've already covered. One of the things is to break learning into smaller chunks. You could teach part of a procedure and teach all the different parts of the procedure and then put it together later. You could also cover up parts of the pages. I think this is one of the things that I do almost every day is I just have a blank sheet of paper so that I can just cover it up. Or you could fold the page in half so that the student can see only part of the problems. When you see they start, look, I've got so many different puzzles, problems to do. Also, I talked a little bit about using multisensory approaches to present new concepts. You need to see it, hear it, do it, smell it if you can, taste it if you can. The more ways you can get the information into your brain, the stronger the pathways that you're building inside of the brain. Provide multiple exposures to concept and use concrete examples. I'm going to ask another question, and then I'll talk a little bit about the learning disability assessment. So the question that's in front of you right now is, how do you teach something new? And when I was in school, we spent one day really, how do you teach the color blue? We all know what blue looks like, but if you were tasked with alien students who just came in, how would you teach the color blue? What kind of concrete examples could you use, and how could you make it multisensory? The learning assessment that we use is called the Community College Chancellor's Office Learning Disability Eligibility Model. All of the community colleges in California use the same system. We do an IQ test and we do an achievement test, and then we analyze the results to figure out what is going on in the classroom and whether the processing disorder and the achievement gap are available. So one thing, you could use authentic instruction. Look around you and see what kind of things are blue, like the blue earth, the blueberries, denim. Look at what people are wearing. Pair an object with a color. So maybe you could get some of the, okay, I used the color wheel from online source and show examples. Have students explore with washable paint. One of the things that's really important is to show what is blue and what is not blue. On my slides, I have blue slides, so it's very light blue at the top and very dark blue at the bottom. So it's giving you a whole range of the type of color that we still call blue. Close your eyes and think of the sky on a beautiful day. You could add the touch by touching blue fabric, denim, velvet, Velcro, so the sense of touch is added to it. I was thinking you could find some blue flowers and smell the blue flowers. Eat some blue candy and everyone can be hyper together. I don't know. We could also talk about that. I mean, the other thing that is really interesting, because you said, how can you feel blue? And the first thing I thought about it is, when we talk about a blue feeling, it's usually that we're sad, which is different from the color blue. But you could also talk about that. I think it's interesting. I don't think you're feeling, you can feel the color blue, although there are some studies that say there are certain people who can see and feel some of the colors. But I think what it is as you touch it, that you see it with your eyes, and then you're memorizing it. Have the students describe it in their own words or use a photograph from the New York Times. I had someone respond to this in a really amazing way, that in some cultures, the color blue and color green are not really the same as they are in English, that the overlap of where green ends and blue starts is different. So, but examples and non-examples, looking at the range and doing it multisensorily would be really good.
Marie, maybe we want to move on because we just have about 7 more minutes.
Okay. The next one is strategies. So I'm going to go to the bottom of this slide first. Is teaching strategies means that students have to learn more things. And as a teacher, we're always trying to figure out, well, if I teach the strategy, it'll make the rest of the learning come quicker. But we do have to be sensitive to every time you have a strategy, first you have to learn the strategy, and then you have to learn when to use the strategy. So a lot of times students know the strategies, but they don't know when to use it. I think in my math class almost every day we used PEMDAS. PEMDAS really, some people learn it as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, exponent, multiply, divide, add, subtract. It's for algebra. Does everyone know what Roy G. Biv is for? It gives you the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Marion really wanted to know what Dead Men Suck Blood Daily was for, and that's long division. So the first step in long division is the D, the division. You look to see how does the number go into it. Then you have to multiply the top number by the divisor. Then you subtract those two numbers, and then you bring down the next number down. So I've had students do dad, mom, sister, brother that way as well. Another strategy would be write down homework in a calendar and really help students to start writing things down, or use their phones. So many of the students have wonderful phones that they can really use to help them keep track. The other thing is that the bad beer rots our young guts, but vodka goes well in silver goblets. This is actually when you're doing electronics and there's a system on resistors, a color code for resistors, you have to learn all the color codes. So instead of numbers, they use colors, and you have to learn it from the beginning. So bad beer rots our young guts, but vodka goes well in silver goblets gives you that color coordination. So I think I wrote it down somewhere. I don't remember from my electronics days, but the BB is black, brown, red, orange, yellow. And so when electricians look at a resistor, they look at the color coding, but they have to learn what all the colors are. It's really powerful when students can make up the mnemonic themselves. I found a really good mnemonic page, and and how to make them, and that's referenced at the back. So what are some strategies that work for you? And I think people have been writing that. How can teachers share strategies that work? Let me, I think this is my last slide here. Oh, almost. Janet Zadina's work, her book is 6 Weeks to a Brain Upgrade. It has 6 weeks of lessons that has translated brain research into reading that students could do. Her research is showing that students' brains continue to develop. Actually, our brains, especially for people with attention deficit disorder, brain is not fully wired and wired until about 25. That's why often we get students in their 20s, 21, 22, they still have a lot of trouble focusing. And then comes the magical day, 23, 24, 25, somewhere around there, and suddenly they can really focus a lot better. And that is because the brain actually has continued to develop. The brain research is showing that brains can continue to develop, and it's really important for students to know that the brain they have right now is not what they're stuck with forever. About 50% of the students that we have in the community colleges have never been diagnosed. So I think it goes back to the universal design, just using the best teaching that you've got to be able to reach the most students that you can.
Marie, I'm just going to switch over to the other layout because, uh-oh.
Yeah,
Sorry,
my clock is saying 1:59, so
yeah, I was looking. Oh, here I told you that you could download the slides. Maybe it's here. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to switch back here because I want you to have a chance to download the slides and by clicking on them in this box on the bottom right. And Marie, you can keep talking. I just wanted to give people a little bit of time to download the slides if they want to.
Right. So the next workshop is February 26th, and what I was going to talk about today was more general teaching, but was to talk about the different types of learning disabilities. For example, auditory processing deficit, people with executive functioning disorders, some strategies that kind of go with those different disabilities that way. So I wanted to do a little advertising for that. And then the last piece was the different references that I had used to during the slide presentation. So I do thank you for all coming, and I hope this was met your needs.
Thank you, Marie. I think it was packed with information, and I'm sure we all have something that we can take back and use. At least one something, if not many, many somethings. So do you remember how to give applause? Let's give Marie a round of applause for doing a great job in a quick 1 hour. That's the drop-down box at the top. There you go, getting a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I'm going to close the meeting now, and when I close it, the evaluation form is going to come up. You might not see it right away because it might be behind this window, so you might have to look around in your browser to find it, but we'll really appreciate you filling out the evaluation so that we can always be striving to be better and better. And thank you for attending, and have a great weekend.
Okay. Thank you very much.